Here we are. We are here. The Data Protection Breakfast Club with good friend Travis LeBlanc. Super duper smart guy.
Giant brain.
Tell me how you met him.
I met him at a event his former firm put on. Giovanni Butarelli, the former super privacy. He was the speaker, and I went and I actually sat next to Travis or across from him at the event. Giovanni's somebody I knew. Well, let's talk about amazing. That guy was incredible. Man, we just hit it off, became friends. We were both living in DC at the time, and he'd worked for the Obama administration and done some interesting things and been a campaigner. He's really close to Kamala Harris and that sphere of people. He's one of the most connected guys in our business, and he kind of goes about his work kind of quietly, he's not out there splashing or doing all kinds of goofy stuff. And
I was chatting with him in pre-production, and and he was talking about his life now. And you're right. It's a lot. He is well connected and he's got a lot going on in his personal, in his career. But you look, all of us, he's waking up, walking downstairs, going to work in his basement and taking care of his child with his wife, and then he goes to bed again and starts over the next
repeat. Yeah. And also awesome family man, good dad. He's a thing, and I look up to him in a lot of ways. And I'm fucking excited he's here. I wish we would have had him on sooner. I know we had to figure it out schedule wise. Top thinker, man. He's super smart, and he's done work for me at previous jobs. The guy is on top of the fact that he's super brilliant, theoretical and gets to law, and he is super practical and gives you actionable advice. He doesn't waste your time as a client either, which I think is super important. So it's all around top lawyer, man. Probably one of the best at our thing for sure.
He's great.
Talk to me about Inspector Gadget's brown gloves. Did I misremember? I thought they were white, but maybe I'm just confused.
This is, I don't purport to have really researched this photo so well.
Yeah, they should have scrutinized these, man. I want accuracy.
My daughters have been into the show lately, and so
I love Inspector Gadget. That song, man. Yeah. That song, Go Gadget Go, man. It was one of my favorite cartoons as a kid, by far.
Have you seen it recently? It's very forward thinking in a weird way. His niece Penny has a book that is like an iPad. She has an iWatch. She's communicating with the dog. They both have iWatches. They're FaceTiming. Dr. Claw has a FaceTime machine. This is 1981 or whatever when this show was. I find myself looking at it going,
at least we know where Steve Jobs got his inspiration.
It's is Steve Jobs watching Inspector Gadget and creating the iPad?
Inspector Gadget, the greatest innovator who ever lived. I'm really impressed. I mean, he really is an innovator, though. I'm looking at this whole thing. He's got an antenna on his thumb and a laser. So it's a whole thing.
That's the Gadget phone.
Yeah, I know. And I did not. I'm gonna rewatch this show. I watched it as a kid. I did, and I loved it. And fuck Mr. Claw, the whole thing. But Dr. Claw, the whole thing. But there it is.
All right, Keanu says bye.
Keanu said bye. Come here, buddy. Come. So I know it. Come.
Okay. All right. So we should end the episode on bye.
No, but here's what it is. I'm glad we're doing this intro and Keanu's popped up. So the road behind my house, the alley, is getting they're chopping up the asphalt and all the curb and they're redoing it. And there's dudes walking around banging and cracking. And every time they slam that, there's a I don't know, man. I don't know what the equipment is. Some massive machine back there destroying the road, and my whole house shakes. The whole house shakes. And so when he feels that or sees the dudes, that's what happens.
Shout out to Keanu for keeping you safe.
Keanu, man. Thank you. I feel safe. Anyway, let's get Travis on here, man,
Right.
and get the show on the road.
Good stuff. Here we are.
We're here.
We're here with Travis LeBlanc, who's a partner at Cooley. And the episode is Inspector Gadget. You can see the guy behind me.
The guy.
The guy. Main guy. Yeah, like Travis is as far from Inspector Gadget generally as someone could come, but I loved when we were talking about framing up talking with you, Travis. You mentioned kind of Go Go Gadget arguments, that you have to pull out of thin air. And so can we start there and start like just a little bit early, like maybe in law school, you went to Yale, which is known for like theoretical approach to law school. So like, how did that inform like your career decisions and your like desire to kind of go into the kind of world that you are now?
Yeah, well, first of all, great to see both of you. Awesome to be here with you, and thanks for the invitation. And looking forward to seeing which one of us gets more Inspector Gadget hints into the conversation today.
You're the one with the big brain.
Oh, that was good. That counts for 2. I got that. I'm going to give you 2 for that one. So I went to Yale knowing that I wanted to have a career in law and in policy. I will admit in 2 seconds, as I think anyone, except maybe the dean of Yale Law School, that a lot of what we learn at a law school like Yale is not black letter traditional law. It's more about understanding our system of laws and understanding the purpose of law and what's the policy behind this, or what's the court trying to do here, or what incentives is the legislature trying to encourage in the population. So I think for me, what it really reflected was a desire for a career that would balance law and policy. And I think that my career actually has done that, of kind of going back and forth between the government and the private sector. And in both of them, working on issues, not just of law, but literally issues of policy as well. And thinking about how, we can advance an area of law, or how we can help ensure that there are policies in place that incentivize the kinds of lawfulness that we would like to see. And lastly, I'll just note that, it kind of gives you this, it kind of helped me to see that the law is not static. It changes. It largely is in the eye of the beholder. And we have the ability to impact it either on large scale, right? An act of Congress, or at a very microcosm level, filing a brief, having a meeting, with a elected official or a regulator. And I think that appreciation for the ability of a lawyer to change what is the law may have dominated over what is the law today.
So that is very informative. And I love the idea of like having a curriculum that is about more theoretical thinking than like the practical application and practice of law, which I think anybody can learn. That part is easy, I think. I'm a law professor and I have been for some time. And I used to teach a class on legal philosophy, which goes along the lines of what you're talking about. And one of the things I would always ask my students to read is the Dred Scott decision, which is long and infamous and horrifying insofar as lawyers on the Supreme Court, so judges who studied at schools like yours and Harvard and wherever, essentially make brilliant legal arguments about human beings as chattel property. and how the law and legal system recognizes that, right? You know, and I'm sure most lawyers read Dred Scott at some point in their careers, right? I have a lot of trouble, Travis, sometimes with the idea of like reconciling all of the like theoretical components of justice and fairness that our Western legal systems claim to be based on and in furtherance of, when I can read a decision like that that's not 500 years old, and it essentially quantify the value of a person as something equal to a goat, right? And so how do, you know, I'm interested in like how we can like reconcile like the promise of the law and the application of it, which we know has been disproportionately applied in a negative way against some groups versus others. Just your general thoughts. I know this isn't privacy, but we brought up theoretical thinking, so here we are.
Yeah, you said, look, that is one of the, biggest challenges that we have faced in looking back over history, right? I think it was Chief Justice Taney that wrote that decision in Dred Scott. He did not go to Yale, by the way. I don't think so. Good. At least, so before you accuse him of going to school with me. In fact, I don't even know that he went to law school.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think that may be accurate. I don't think he went to law school, but I could be wrong about that. You heard me say a few minutes ago that law is oftentimes the eye of the beholder. I think if you asked me to rationalize the decisions that have been made, I would tell you that, in each of those instances, it was in the eye of the beholder, right? And that's what they thought at the time. Obviously, I do not support that decision. It was not rightly decided. And, yet we have a 14th Amendment now, right, that has been the same since it was ratified, and gets wildly different. It gets wildly different interpretations depending upon who read it, right? In 96, somewhere in there, we get Plessy versus Ferguson, right? Which is interpreting, separate but equal, the equal protection clause, interpreting it and saying, and looking at it and kind of coming to the conclusion that you can have separate but equal. And it's not until 1954-ish, when you get Brown versus Board, where they say separate but equal is inherently unequal. It's the same text. It's the same constitutional history that was there. It's the same, yet we somehow have literally opposite decisions. So, I can't tell you that, I've got the overarching theory that links them together, other than to say that, many people have observed that, the state of Supreme Court precedent is whatever a majority of the court says it is at the time. And that may be the most rational way to reach it, rather than trying to explain, how it is that, well-educated jurists could come to contradictory conclusions on the same facts and the same legal precedent in history.
Yeah, and I think 2 points of fact. You're right. Taney didn't go to law school. He read law under some judge. He did go to Dickinson's College undergrad. I'm looking at this on Wikipedia, so hopefully it's right. And then the other thing is, and I had forgotten this, it was a 7-2 decision. This is outrageous, right? And so, no, I appreciate your thoughts on that, because to me it colors a lot of my work in privacy and like the legacy of marginalization is something I'm very conscious of in our practice. And I'm a policy guy too, which is like trying to ensure that we don't repeat, obviously maybe not at the severity level of the mistakes of the past, but we don't repeat some of the patterns of the past, which include like exclusion of meaningful voices just because they're not in the majority. And I think in privacy, that's a big issue, right? Like, I think it's a big issue. I think there's a elite privileged group of like privacy gurus, we're in it, right? That have our point of view on like what's right. And very seldomly do we take into account, I think as a profession, well, seldomly strong, but not often enough do we take into account like feedback from the people that whose privacy we're protecting, right? There's a lot of like I know bestish, in my opinion, around our profession, which could go down a scary path, not aligned with like people's actual expectations in the world, and could potentially harm vulnerable people in the name of privacy. One of the examples of this for me is like privacy as a luxury, and the idea that like we should pay for things so that we don't pay for it by being monetized, right? And in theory, that sounds great, right? Buy an iPhone, it's $1,200, and it's going to be much more privacy, whatever, than an Android, right? 95% of the world's population can't afford it, right? Probably more. And so like that's an example for me of how like some of this manifests, which is like, we'll build the best thing, but it's only for the rich. Okay, well, like what does, like, how is that in furtherance of the greater good then? You know, this is how I think those types of themes and patterns sneak into our daily work, right? Which is privacy as luxury, you know, freemium services being, you know, potentially like less functional or a diminished experience from others. And I know there's laws out there like GDPR, which suggests you can't do that. But like in the US, we don't have the same framework, right? And so,
This is a tricky balance because the gadgets that
yeah,
we are accustomed to um, thinking about and working with, you know, as tech lawyers, are so complicated, and the tech itself is so forward thinking that we're in this situation where who, like your point is so accurate. Like there's this group of sort of massive group of data subjects whereby they're using a lot of technology and gadgets, and they don't have a sense for how they work. We barely have a sense for how they work. We work for these companies and represent these companies, and sometimes the tech is so complicated. How are we supposed to balance the fact that we really are the ones when we're product counseling in that capacity, or when we're kind of advising on a policy matter? How are we not supposed to kind of try to take the angle of what is of the greater good for the data subject as a sort of loose term versus like how, and I'm not quite, it's sticky because I'm not quite sure how else to do it, because I can't communicate effectively in a privacy policy. It's, if I can try and I can communicate things in the privacy policy, but we all know that only goes so far. Our grandparents, people will, like tons of people will never ever really get in there and engage and understand the privacy policy. It's there for a lot of other reasons, and it's important, but how do we, I don't know how we find the balance, right, of where we should wade in and actually help. And is that our own ethics and morals, or our companies, or our business? Like, so maybe, or we, maybe we're, I'm interested to hear what Travis thinks. I mean, as an advisor to businesses too.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all know that no one is going to inspect every privacy policy, right? That would be maddening for anyone to do, and it would take up a massive amount of time. And there have been numerous studies out there about the amount of time it would take all of us to read every privacy policy of every website or app, or device now that we use. We'd be here forever. So clearly the privacy policy is, or the privacy statement is unlikely to be an effective avenue for communicating, values to the overwhelming majority of users, consumers, subscribers, patrons, whatever you want to call them. I have said on more than one occasion, including most recently last week for Data Privacy Day, that privacy is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And when I say that, it is imbued with all of the history that we have had around civil rights in this country, and the issues that we are creating today for the future. And what I mean by that is, Pedro, to one of the issues that you were discussing, is kind of the inequities that are there. One of the problems we've had, in my view, in the way that we have discussed privacy over the last decades in the US is it's really been controlled by the civil liberties, advocacy community, which is not a bad thing. It's great to have them involved, but the civil rights communities have been divorced from it. They've been focused on the, the issues impacting, communities of, color and women and other, ethnic or religious minorities in the real world today, while not spending as much time on it in the virtual world. And so one of the things we have to do, I think, is encourage, the more traditional civil rights organizations, the more traditional civil rights focused, companies and enterprises to focus on these issues around digital inequities and around privacy in particular. And similarly, we need to educate the civil liberties sides, or more oriented people about the civil rights concerns and why it's important to recognize the inequities and pay for privacy, in some instances. And similarly, recognizing that the only way you ever get to use online products is if you have an internet connection.
Exactly.
Which means thinking about the issues around actually getting access to online to be able to engage in the digital. So that we have to confront about how we approach privacy as a civil rights issue. And if we do that, then I think the role of the chief privacy officer or the product counsel focusing on privacy becomes one that is motivated by a protection of civil rights and not merely compliance. And I think, for a while, sort of the commitment that we've seen from a lot has been around making sure we're just complying with the law, complying with the guidance that we've gotten from agencies, as opposed to moving it more into the civil rights, to the ethic realm of doing what we think is right. Being able to promote the values that we want to promote in society, make it a more proactive measure than a defensive, compliance, traditional compliance type measure. And some companies have done that. Some companies have pulled that off, that trying to make this about their values. And others, have made it about compliance. And I think that what we'll see moving forward in the 21st century, we're certainly seeing it out of Europe, but what we'll see in the 21st century is more of a desire, more of a recognition that where we stand on privacy will ultimately be as important as where we stand on racial equality, right? Those two, where we stand on gender equality, where we stand on LGBTQ equality. Privacy will be up there in the same way, because there will be some people that have complete access to it and some people that do not. And how are we going to treat that is going to be our challenge.
Travis, how long do you think, and Pedro too, how long do you think it will take us to get to that state? That's a very that would be good, if we got to that place. How long do we think it'll take to get there?
I tend to be an optimistic person, but in this case, I'm pessimistic, because even if you look inside of companies and law firms and other organizations, a lot of diversity and inclusion, which is more tied to the civil rights piece that Travis is talking about, efforts are really about protecting the company. And it lands disingenuously with me and lots of people of color, right? That it's basically a CYA exercise for the firm or for the company or whatever. Now, there are some companies, to Travis's point, that have meaningfully internalized D&I as part of the corporate culture of the company and make it a fundamental value, because they've found a business proposition as to why it's important, which is the more we look like our customer, the better we are as a company. And that means we need employees of all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, whatever, right? To be here and be functional, be happy, and meaningfully contribute, so we can represent, so we can cater better to whatever our customer base is. I think in privacy, Travis is 100% right. Like the chief privacy officer function. I've turned down several chief privacy officer jobs. And the main reason is I don't want to be a compliance goon for a company to just check a bunch of boxes and make sure that they don't catch an FTC consent decree. Like that isn't interesting to me. What is more interesting is what Travis is talking about, what I think I have the opportunity to do here at Facebook, which is actually advance the privacy ethos and goals in a way that actually drives the preservation and enhancement and improvement of people's privacy, private spaces, and ability to exclude others from information that they're not interested in sharing. And so like, I'm super with Travis in the sense of like, it would be great to turn in that direction. I'm not optimistic that companies are investing in their privacy organizations with that in mind. Now, I don't have the view Travis has, which is lots of companies. So I'd be interested to hear.
I want to ask Travis a follow, like, is there a sea change or a litigation or an investigation or a thing that happens with a large tech company that could advance the ball quickly on that? Or is it just like I'm guessing it's probably a series of things, but I would like to know what you think about that.
Yeah, look, I don't think that the invisible hand of the market is going to move this very quickly, right? On the other hand, a statutory or regulatory claw might pull us there a lot quicker. And what could that look like? I think, baseline comprehensive privacy legislation in the United States could begin to push us, would actually push us substantially in that direction. We've seen the way the CCPA, has changed the way that companies think about privacy, many of them just from a compliance measure. But there are provisions in the CCPA that have these civil rights components built into them, right? The idea that there's a basic privacy right that everyone has and cannot be required to give up. That's your civil right, right? It's clearly within the CCPA. You have digital equity issues that are built into the CCPA about trade-offs, asking someone to give up their privacy, right? So that to me was a significant movement in the direction of recognizing the importance of privacy, of control over personal data and the sharing of that data in the 21st century. And I think if we had something like that at the federal level, which is unlikely as of today, but we keep hoping for, if we had something like that at the federal level, I think it could meaningfully move us in the direction of protecting privacy as a civil right and a civil liberty.
Those are great points. I just want to quickly call out the NAI. The NAI code has had things baked into it for 15 years that addressed some of these things, but clearly it's got, a ways, there's other things going on there, but I just want to, they don't get enough credit for creating a code that dealt with, the use of data that could impact someone's credit or could impact someone's, a financial impact to somebody because they're in a disparate situation or they don't, have the ability to control things that are happening around them. So I think we've talked a lot about the federal privacy law and whether that will be some sort of panacea or not. But I think at the end of the day, I agree with that point that will be a thing that moves things forward. It won't solve everything, but it'll
and look, like, if I were writing, the NAI code, I'd want it to go further than it is, but I can put that apart aside. When we don't have a federal law, when we don't have any law really, or very little law, for an industry to step up, and decide to come up with a code or something to work with is a good thing. It's better than the wild, wild west, to have, an industry take responsibility for its own self-policing. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're about to get anything anytime soon. And you guys have spoken about it more than enough, as have I, about the likelihood of of, comprehensive data privacy legislation. I'm hopeful that, when you have a House, a Senate, and the White House, all controlled by Democrats, that, there is a room for moving something, but, there still will, still need to get over, preemption and a private right of action, right? These kinds of issues that seem to be the main impediments, to it proceeding.
And then circling back to something we called out, Travis, earlier on, we have a conservative Supreme Court right now. So even if we create a law that works, then the interpretation of that law going up through that court will be it'll be interesting to see what happens then, when we have matters and issues that arise that go up. This all reminds me of this West Wing episode called The Short List, when they're picking a Supreme Court justice, and they're picking these different candidates apart, and one of them has some privacy decision, and a bunch of people are like, privacy, what, like that pales in comparison to the issues they're talking about in the late 90s, their abortion issues, and they're other things. And the Rob Lowe character, he's a lawyer, and he goes on this long, amazing, sort of quote about how important personal privacy is in the digital age. It was well before its time, but it calls that quote back to me, it calls that quote back, because it's exactly what you're saying. Even if we sort of push it forward, we're going to go through this really interesting push and pull when it comes to interpreting that law and seeing what would happen.
Yeah, and I also don't think privacy should be partisan. I know the reality, but it seems to me the privacy interpretation into the Bill of Rights is sound, established law that isn't up for question, in my opinion. I mean, I guess anything can be changed, but I'm with Travis completely, right? The need for a national privacy law is obvious to me, not just for harmony amongst, so everybody can have equal rights. And the point I make is I think it's absurd that if I live in California, Google, Facebook can treat me one way, and if I live in Texas, they can treat me another. That to me is just bizarre. Not saying the companies do, but I'm saying that's, to me, the fact that they could is ridiculous. And so that's one point. And then to Travis's other point, what an opportunity for the federal government to get something right. There's enough information and enough expertise and enough data out there at this point to show that privacy enhancement and privacy protections will go a long way to doing what the damn Declaration of Independence says we all have a right to do: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We know these things are intertwined, right? And you mentioned abortion. Abortion is a privacy case. It's a privacy case, right? This is abortion, not abortion. Roe v. Wade is a privacy case, right? Look at privacy sprawling kind of effect on just kind of national consciousness. And so, to your point about conservatives versus Democrats, Roe v. Wade. Anyway.
Well, look, Pedro, look, privacy should not be a partisan issue. In fact, virtually every poll that is done finds that it is overwhelmingly bipartisan. The issue itself is overwhelmingly bipartisan in this day and age. The impediments, are, not really unique to privacy. They are more about, consumer protection statutes. Should states have the ability to each have their own laws? Should, plaintiffs' attorneys be able to have, to enforce these laws through private rights of action, right? Those are two major impediments that are there. What we're seeing in the absence, though, is more states stepping up to the plate, after California, right? I think in the last week or two, we've seen, bills introduced and advancing in Virginia and New York and Washington for the third or fourth time. All those are just off the top of my head. What I suspect is also happening now that we're seeing legislation advancing and being enacted across the world is we're seeing a lot of convergence on the basic theories about what would be fundamental to a privacy law. We're starting to see that, users should control their data. I mean, that seems to almost be a fundamental premise of each one, that you should be able to request deletion, right? Those kinds of things are starting to come out a little bit more, which would hopefully make it easier to identify the major issues in federal legislation, over which I suspect you could get bipartisan agreement.
And I think you're absolutely right. Like, you're right. I mean, the issue is not agreeing that privacy matters. It's all of the other kind of ancillary issues that come along with the idea of a national privacy law that become partisan. So I totally understand where you're coming from there. All right, I'm going to lighten the mood and ask 2 questions that I think you're perfect to give feedback on, and I'm super interested. Jeff Bezos, what is happening? Like, what does that mean for Amazon? Like, here's how I think of Jeff Bezos. The man built 3 businesses, not one. Okay, like, he's built 3. I read this morning, and somebody said he could be the best tech CEO ever. And I'm like, shit, he probably is. He built AWS. That's its own business. It's a sticky, top tier, lead cloud infrastructure platform, whatever. Obviously, Amazon, like the bookstore and the store itself. And then the 3rd business is he's probably got the 3rd largest logistics operation, or 4th. I mean, I don't know what the actual number is, but he's got easily top 10 logistics operations on earth at this point. You can get overnight shipping in Taiwan with Amazon Prime, like in Taiwan, and so like, what do you think's going on there? Is he going to get political? Is he looking to be like a Larry Ellison type chairman? Any idea what's happening there?
He has a space business also.
Is that what it is? He's going to go out to the moon or whatever, Mars or whatever. Like, what do you guys think? Both of you, I'm interested. Just what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was going to say the space business, Andy. You took that one from me pretty quickly. Look, I don't know Jeff Bezos, so I'm going to start there. I do not work at Amazon, so I'll put that out there as well. So I'm speculating, much like the rest of you. Number one, I suspect that it allows him to focus on some other endeavors. That when you're the day-to-day CEO of a large enterprise, you just can't do space. Would seem to be one. I don't hear the Washington Post coming, but he does own, has an ownership interest in the Washington Post. But there's also something to be said for knowing, as a founder, when to step down, right? Do you wait until it's, really crumbling and then you say, okay, maybe now let's bring in someone, or do you recognize, when it's someone else's turn? And it looks like the new CEO, I think his last name is Jazzy. Or Jassy, something along those lines.
It's DJ Jazzy Jeff.
I wish.
Yeah. The new COO, Fresh Prince.
Yeah.
But I think that he's been at the company for 20 plus years. 27. And
you mean the new CEO? Yes.
Yeah, right. And he's built up the what is probably the largest business unit within Amazon today. AWS, I believe, is the largest.
Definitely the most profitable.
Yeah, the most profitable. Yeah, the most profitable. But there are, we could go through the list of, sort of reinventions or expansions that Amazon has had. It was first a bookstore, then it kind of became a store of everything, right? We kind of go there for everything. AWS. You have, when we thought everything was going online, then you get an acquisition of Whole Foods, right? And you start opening up Amazon stores, literal physical locations. Then we see, this infrastructure, this delivery infrastructure that not only includes, autonomous units, but, is paying a lot of people, to drive, and deliver products, and not relying upon, the Postal Service or FedEx to do so. I saw there was an FTC action yesterday involving them, so I don't want to, disregard that, the FTC, took some action yesterday. But it's a recognition of just how expansive that enterprise is. That if you wanted to focus your efforts on something like space, it would be hard, I think, to do. And I think it's Jeff Bezos who made the comment some time ago about how, look, one of the great things about being a CEO is, every day you only have to make like 2 good decisions. You make 2 good decisions that are profitable, and you're done for the day. But there's a lot of meetings where may not some not so good decisions. I think the ability to kind of focus in on some other things could make him, will he be a politician? I don't know. Will he engage in other endeavors, whether they're philanthropic or, in space, remains to be seen.
I was going to add to that. Here's what I hope he does. I don't know what he will do. They were dabbling in a healthcare joint venture with like JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway. I don't think that's going to happen anymore, but I hope that they use their logistics prowess for public health purposes. So like we're clearly in a situation where that's needed. And it would be great if someone like Amazon leads an effort to get shots in people's arms. Like,
I think that's dope. Yeah.
I hope that's what he does. And then I hope, you mentioned this, Travis, I hope there's a philanthropic arm to what he's doing. Bill Gates did that. You have to imagine that. And then the third thing, I think, is he's going to keep lifting weights. That guy's super jacked.
Yeah.
So he's gonna, he's
2 to 3 good decisions a day. Once you're done, Andy, once you're done with those 2 or 3, see you later.
He's on the Nordic track after that.
I hope he also I hope we go to the moon, and I hope like there's an Amazon Prime logo on something. Like deliver me to the moon on Amazon Prime is something I'd be super excited.
Our buddy Shane can help with that, with the space.
Yeah, let's go to Mars, let's go to the moon, all this stuff that he's got his eyes up towards the sky, and like I think he's in an incredibly privileged position to hopefully kind of challenge the future that way. Like we know we have to go outwardly. So last question. Your firm, Travis, has a huge presence in California, is well known as like a super Silicon Valley, like, I don't know, like support critical infrastructure for like Silicon Valley and like the exponential growth that's happened there in our lifetimes, insofar as like innovation and business, like the top 5 businesses in the country. We know what they are, and there they are. And so like I keep like Oracle, the company I used to work for, just announced late last year they're going to move their headquarters to Texas. Elon Musk moved, right? Like, or is leaving Texas or whatever. There's this talk about like flight from California, out of San Jose, out of the whatever. Like, are you seeing that? Like, is it real? Is it hype? What does it mean? Is it good to have a high concentration of like knowledge and expertise in one place? Is it better if it's distributed? What are your general thoughts? Is the exodus from California real? I'd be interested to hear what you think there. And if it is, like, what do you think are some of the implications of that?
Yeah, it's hard to tell, Pedro, in this COVID environment when we're all working from home. It's hard to know exactly where people are. And we've certainly seen I'd say a substantial exodus from cities around the country, right? During the pandemic. So, I would tell you that I've probably seen just about as many, people fleeing California as New York, in terms of being in the middle of the country somewhere. In fact, it blew my mind, but we've started getting applications from associates that want to work virtually permanently from some state in the country. They never intend to go into an office. Now that creates taxing issues that everyone's trying to figure out right now, which is, if you're an employee in Michigan, but we don't have an office in Michigan, you're practicing from Michigan, who pays taxes? Which taxes do you pay? And also, what if you're not a member of the Michigan bar? And you're practicing Michigan. So that creates all its own issues there. Long time ago, Cooley recognized that there were a number of tech sectors that had popped up around the country that were not Silicon Valley, right? Silicon, they have all these nice names, right? Silicon Beach, or Silicon Street. Right, you've got all these different areas of the country, and so over the years, we've actually opened up offices in a lot of what I will call the tech hubs, such as Seattle or Reston, Virginia was our first East Coast.
Reston Valley, man. That's where I used to be, right? Yeah.
That's right, or Reston, or New York City. We have offices in Boston, right?
Travis, Cooley's very competitive in our market here in Boston.
Yeah, so we have opened up into the other tech sectors, recognizing that California wasn't going to be the centerpiece for that in perpetuity. And ultimately recognizing that to some degree, every company has to be a tech company. Every company has a website. Every company is collecting data and using data. At some point, every company has to be innovative today, or someone will come in and disrupt you. And once, kind of accepting that, we've migrated to a lot of places. We don't yet have an office in Texas. We don't have an office in Miami, which is the other big one that you hear people, exiting to. But I believe, without, speaking for, our firm and our leadership, my suspicion is if those sectors grow there, if that's where tech goes, we will go with them. The future for our firm that is public is that, one of the biggest growth areas that we see for tech will be New York. New York just really, it's got a lot. The tech community in New York is thriving, but it is really set to blow up in the coming years. And so, our presence there, I believe will continue. We're quite, we have a large office there, but I believe it will in Hudson Yards. But I believe, will grow even more into the next few years there.
Let me put a plug in for Atlanta. Since I've been here about 2 years, the Salesforce Tower went up. Google is building not a headquarters, but a massive operation here. Microsoft is. Facebook, obviously, is here. That's for Amazon has a big presence here. Oracle is here. This is the biggest tech hub in the Southeast by far, and I live in it, right? But here, tying this back to our original conversation, it's also, I don't know the statistic, but it has to be one of the greatest concentrations of Black and people of color intellectual power in the country. This is the smartest brown city I've ever lived in. And the talent doesn't want to leave. I don't want to leave. One of the things that Facebook and I had to negotiate carefully was the fact that I'm staying right here. And so for your firm and for tech companies out there watching this podcast, Atlanta is a great place to put a building and hire some people if you're really passionate about hiring people of color and non-traditional kind of path folks, because we have a lot of brilliant, smart people here.
Look, and Pedro, look, we can all see your huge, massive house that you're in back there.
That's right.
Let me tell you, I mean, the echo, Andy and I have been just absorbing this echo from all those rooms. There, let's admit how much one can afford.
Oh my goodness.
To have, for, in Atlanta with respect to just the quality of life. It's just much cheaper than certainly California.
Yes. Yeah. Taxes aren't too bad. And I mean, look, not to put a feather in my own hat, but yes, I lived in DC the last 10 years before moving here. Lived in a beautiful apartment on the Northeast, view of the Capitol. It was 750 square feet, something stupid like that. I live in a much larger home with garages and things. And
garages, Andy, you heard the S at the end. Garage is.
Bathrooms and things. And I live alone with my dog, and my girlfriend comes around or whatever. But your point, I paid less for this place than my apartment.
I didn't know that the city of Atlanta was sponsoring this.
Yeah, man. Shout out to Atlanta.
But shout out to Atlanta. Shout out to, the success of the Atlanta Falcons over the years.
And man.
Everything, Holman and Finch. I mean, great city. So we have to let Travis go. But hey, man, thanks for joining us. Thanks
Travis,
for
man.
Great conversation.
Travis, well, I'll say this before we go, and I know we're gonna talk about it again, but thanks for doing this, man. You're one of my good friends, and I think of you as a thought leader on so many issues, and we should have had you on earlier. Scheduling is what it is, but thank you, man.
No worries. Look, it's so great to be here to see both of you. I consider you a good friend as well, and certainly someone that is forward thinking and pushes me, frankly, to think differently about everything that I do, whether it's with respect to privacy or just to life and the profession.
Thanks a lot. It's mutual.
All right, Travis, thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Really meant it. Appreciate you being here, bro.
No problem. All right. Bye-bye.